Small Changes by Digits 27, Chapter 37, Familiar Talks. Naruto couldn't help the smile that grew on his face when he appeared in his living room only to spot Uncle curled up on the couch. He had expected her to stay up for him, and usually when he found her like this, there was a lot more empty bottles of sake strewn around. He tested his side again and only felt a minor twinge, so he felt safe enough to gently pick her up and start carrying her upstairs. She hated it when he flashed around the house with her, said it made her nauseous. It seemed his efforts were for naught, though, as she gently stirred while he was climbing the stairs. "Hey, you," she mumbled, shifting to get more comfortable. "You were gone for a while." "I came back, though." Hanko just smiled sleepily, lifting her head as best she could for a kiss. Naruto met her halfway. "You always do. There was just something I needed to do." He almost laughed at her sleepy attempt to look quizzically. "You get it done?" "I hope so." "Good." She nodded like a child who had been told the monsters had been cleared from the closet. "Done like when you're gone." Naruto could only sigh at that, still smiling. "Me neither." "Can you believe we're going to be parents?" she suddenly said as he moved into the room. "Me and you?" "Believe it?" he asked with a chuckle. "No way." He quickly leaned down before she could reply. "Ecstatic about it." He stole a quick kiss, leaving Uncle pouting when he pulled away. "Absolutely." He smiled at that, mewing adorably when he set her down on the bed. She immediately grabbed his arm and dragged him down with her before he could move away. "I love you." It was Naruto's turn to smile as she kissed him, still looking barely awake. He realized something, lying there with Anko at his side, her purple hair messily falling over her face, and just the faintest hints of drool at the corner of her lip. It's something he'd thought 100,000 times before, and every time he meant it honestly. But just then, in the weak moonlight streaking through the blinds, him covered in bruises, and her an overly large T-shirt that he'd never thought it quite like this. "Marry me," Uncle just chuckled in that sleepy way. "Sure." Naruto's smile grew. She wasn't taking him seriously. "No, really. Marry me." She languidly shifted her neck, bringing her face level with his, but something about the way he was looking at her must have alerted her as she was suddenly very much awake. "You're serious?" "Never more so in my life." And even he was surprised by just how much he meant that. "I did a lot today, but all of it just reminded me that life is short. For Shinobi, shorter. I love you. I could never imagine myself not loving you." He smiled, wrapping an arm around her and pulling her until they were flush. This close, he could only see her eyes, the eyes that always reminded him of chocolate from the first day he met her. "So, marry me." This isn't because he saw her eyes glance down to her stomach. "No, this." He lightly tickled her belly, making her squirm in his grip. "Was because I love you, and this." He lifted her chin until they were eye to eye, capturing her lips and prolonging the kiss until they were forced to come up for air. "It's because I love you." This time he just wrapped his arm around her, letting her nestle her head into the crook of his arm. "I'm asking you to marry me because I want to marry you. I don't need another reason." He heard a faint sniff, and when he looked down, Uncle was doing an adorable job of not letting herself cry, smirking playfully up at him. "Yeah, then where's my ring?" The redhead looked up thoughtfully for a moment before grinning, reaching down and gripping her hand tightly, thumb and index fingers over her ring finger. Uncle felt the tinkle and watched as a small, thin Horaitian cheeky wrapped around the base of her finger. "I'm sure I can come up with something better, but until then, how's—" He never got the chance to finish as Uncle stopped admiring her new accessory and quickly turned to capture his lips. When she finally released them, he noticed an all too familiar gleam enter her eye. "You woke me up. Well, I'm sure there's something I can do to make it up to you. Oh, I have some ideas." However, when she suddenly reversed their positions, startling him with a sudden hungry glint only growing stronger, Naruto winced. The pain in his side suddenly flared up. Sakura was good, but she wasn't a miracle worker. Uncle immediately noticed his discomfort and its source. A frown swirling replaced her smirk. "But first, maybe you can tell me what exactly you've been doing." The redhead could only grin sheepishly. "Funny story, that. So let me get this straight." Kakashi drawled the spread out over one of the couches to the side of the Hokage's office. "You managed to fight Akage, winning, mind you, and a potential war before it really picks up. Got engaged to your longtime girlfriend after finding out she's pregnant, and you get thrown in the doghouse all in the same day." Naruto wasn't sure why he was allowing Kakashi to mock him like this, aside for some residual respect for him as a Nambu captain. That particular well was very quickly drying up. Same evening, actually, he replied, as thought they were talking about as though they were talking about an old mission instead of the day before. Kakashi whistled a long tone. Damn, you really do work fast, don't you? Naruto gave the man a level stare. Don't you have, I don't know, missions or training or something? Kakashi put his hands up in mock surrender, the eye smile giving away his insincerity. Well, I mean, if you really insist, Hokage-sama. Naruto bit back a groan. People had been jibbing him like that all day. Don't call me that. It's not official yet. As good as I'm afraid, my boy, Hiruzen said as he walked into the room. Word of your actions yesterday have spread remarkably fast. His eyes crinkled with mirth. I believe the Hyuga were actually rather upset with you for ending the war before too much Kumo blood could be spilt. He glanced around the room quickly, noting the similar narrative behind what was incredibly the Namikaze desk instead of his own. No shadow clone today. What's the point? The redhead lamented. It's not like I had anywhere to be in a hurry. Uncle will hold this grudge for a few days yet, so I might as well give all of this. He motioned somewhat more morosely to the stack of documents lining every inch of the desk. My full attention. Hiruzen merely smiled as he sank into a particularly plush chair at the other side of the office from Kakashi. Spoken like a true Kage. At that point, Naruto had simply had enough and allowed his head to fall forward, smacking into the desk with a rather satisfied thump. Not you, too, he mumbled from somewhere between a C rank mission report and a stack of requisition forms. Come with the territory, my boy, the other Hokage gibbered without a hint of remorse, nursing his pipe with a malicious grin. Naruto sighed as he sat back up, pulling a sheet of paper from where it had stuck to his forehead. He gave it a quick glance and frowned. It would likely belong in a pile that was beginning to grow worryingly large. Many reports from the grass region that spoke of unusual movements from the Iwa side of things as they trickled in from border scouts in the area. They were painting an incredibly depressing picture. Iwa was mobilizing. What do you make of these? Naruto asked, passing one of the more worrying reports of an incursion by Iwa sources in Hinokuni itself over to the older man. Hiruzen barely had to gaze it. Hiruzen barely had to give it a cursory glance before exhaling a large cloud of smoke. His features quickly losing their amused edge. I suppose something like this, although I suspected something like this, although I maintained hope that Onoki would live up to his title and be a bit more cautious. He stood up and placed the report back in its appropriate pile, choosing instead to stand by the window, one of his preferred vantage points to look out over what, for the longest time, he had considered his village. I think that as my older rival grows older, younger, more energetic voices begin to hold sway in Iwa. He took another puff of his pipe, the brief pause allowing him to collect his thoughts. The grudges from the old wars run deep. Many have been lost fathers, mothers, husbands, and wives. They've smelt the blood in the water, and while I hope to Kumakakuri withdrawal back to their borders would stem any rash actions from our northern cousins, it seems opportunism has won out. Another pause. I'm afraid if Onoki has been swayed to another invasion, it will take a little more than a duel to push back that particular tide. Nato winced at the subtle jab at his own rash actions before sobering as he examined another report. Iwa weren't even trying to hide their intentions, banking on Konohara's north border still being stretched thin from the joint assault from their smaller neighbors, with grass locked in skirmishing actions in the northern towns. It would be all too easy for Iwa to sweep in mass and bypass the old killing grounds of Ame region. To redraw their forces again such an assault would leave them open to a counterattack from Orochimaru, and even though Taki had essentially backed off since the capture of their Jinchuriki, they couldn't exactly trust their disloyally former allies to play nice. In the meantime, Konoha was running short on men and even shorter on a far more precious resource, friends. After the invasion, trust with Suna was thin at best. The smaller villages had made their opinion of Konoha all too clear. Kumo was now in a sensitive position. Naruto wouldn't dare begin to rock, and Kiri, well, despite their re-emergence into the world since their bloody civil war, nobody really knew what Kiri's intentions were. For all Naruto knew, they would be the next to try and take a bite out of Fire Country. You have some time yet to think on this, Naruto, Hiruzen reminded him. Onaki is slow to make decisions, and if he has decided on invasion, it will take him time to organize. He knows he has only one avenue to invade through since Ame closed its borders, and there's little love lost between Iwa and Grass. That's if Grass doesn't turn around and reinforce Iwa's invasion. Naruto argued. He was surprised at the ferocity in Hiruzen's eyes when the older man turned. Then we make them pay for it tenfold. He walked over to the map table Naruto had meticulously restored it with a few improvements of his own. It was now a great deal easier to quickly update as the information changed. Iwa is not the most fertile country, relying a great deal on food imports from the land of stone, fangs, birds, and valleys to the south. He ran a finger along the line of smaller countries that formed a wedge between Kaze no Kune and Suki no Kuni. In any prolonged war, Iwa knows will cut that supply off by any means necessary. The village itself can survive, but only by taxing food from surrounding towns. Eventually, the daimyo of Earth will intervene and veto their war the moment it becomes too costly for the country. He shook his head. No, Oniki knows no, Oniki knows a protracted war with the Konoha when we are more than capable of feeding ourselves as long as necessary would be ill-advised. Another puff from the pipe. We will put everything into he will put everything into his initial offense and try to cut as large a section of our land out as he can, likely hoping to use that to grow food for any further actions he takes in the war. He outlined the rough area that was currently a hotbed of guerrilla warfare with Grand Shinobi. We rebuffed that first offensive, and Onaki will be forced to back off. Naruto frowned. Konoha was already weakened, and Iwa would have the advantage of first move, and that would be costly. Hiruzen nodded sadly. As all wars ultimately are, Naruto walked around and scrutinized the map. There must be another way, maybe a counter-offensive that relies on some advantages we have in the territory, or a preemptive strike. I wouldn't worry yourself over it too much today, my boy. I'm still around to pick up the slack for now. Hiruzen consoled, scrutinizing the map himself and mind going through similar loops as his younger successor. As I understand it, we may be very busy in the coming months. I would take the opportunity to enjoy the relative peace while we still can. Nato nodded idly, not sure how he could possibly slack off now, of all times. I'll try. He didn't sound all that committed to it. He was inside, knowing what the younger man was thinking. He had been in the same position many times before. He glanced up, noting that Kakashi had left early into the conversation. Talk about war with Iwo must have been uncomfortable considering what he lost in their last conflict. He patted the redhead on the shoulder before moving over to a stack of reports. There was a time to allow Naruto to learn the ins and outs of the positions, and there was time to provide everything he could to help, as was Konoha Shinobi's duty. Well, we'll think of something. Goddamn Dono. He was glad to see the small, bemused smile that briefly lifted the redhead's lips. He wasn't sure why his feet pulled him in the direction of the Uchiha compound that night as he made his way home. As part of him knew it was probably just procrastination to put off dealing with the crouching, vindictive uncle. Although coming back late probably wouldn't help the situation, a different part of him supposed it was habit. He often used to come here in better days before Shisui died. Before Itachi, back then it was a comfortable place where he could work off frustration with a good spar, where he could talk through his problems, where he knew a receptive ear was waiting. He didn't share everything with Uncle. Back then, some things just had to stay between guys. Nowadays, well, he couldn't quite recall the last time he had been here. The old sturdy gate was just how he remembered it, although the fact that he could just push it open was different. It used to take knocking very loud just to get a passing Uchiha on the other side to come open it up. Inside the compound was disconcerting, so empty compared to his memories of a bustling little community with kids and shops and packs of mothers gossiping about their children's stories from the academy. Despite how long it had been, his feet knew the way easily, and he was outside the Uchiha clan head's house before he really knew what he was doing. Giving the door a soft rap, a small rebellious part of his mind hoped nobody answered, but eventually the door slid open. He hadn't even heard footsteps on the other side. Even decades of retirement couldn't take away such ingrained skills. Hi, he cursed himself internally at the rather lame greeting, but rewarded all the same by a soft, if slightly surprised smile from Mikoto. Oh, Naruto-kun, what an unexpected pleasure! The redhead nearly winced. He knew the woman was only being sincere. He had known her long enough to know she barely had an unkind bone in her body, and it was no wonder she hadn't found the shinobi lifestyle to be to her liking. But it still felt like a stab to to the chest to be reminded how much he had been avoiding this exact meeting. Yeah, I'm sorry for not coming around before, or anywhere nearly as much as he owed her. The rebellious voice piped in. I suppose he paused right there before he could make a mistake. No, I really don't have an excuse. I guess I've kind of been avoiding this. Mikado just smiled sadly, glancing back into the house. We all deal with tragedies in our own ways. She brightened up slightly as she stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. What's important is you're here. I assume you came for Sasuke. He's in his room. She bit her lip as they walked further into the house. It was furnished differently than Naruto remembered. He supposed neither of them wanted too many reminders of what happened. Sasuke's been rather upset since coming back from his last mission. I get the feeling he's beating himself up over what happened. Naruto's Naruto had read the report and was more inclined to blame the Hyuga hair if he was honest with himself. Although he knew that was just protectiveness over his students, nobody was really to blame over what happened, and he knew Sasuke had done the best he could given the situation. I'll talk to him. Mikoto smiled fondly. I remember you saying the same thing when Itachi. She trailed off, glancing at a nearby photo of the four of them, Sasuke, Itachi, Mikoto, and Fugaku. She bit her lip again and took a deep breath. You're always such a good friend to him, and I wanted to thank you. You don't have to thank me for that. Itachi was just as much a friend to me as I was to him, for as long as it lasted. He was beginning to grow uncomfortable with the old man emotions being dredged up here. No, not for that. I could see how happy the three of you and that girl uncle were together. She smiled fondly. I heard you two were engaged now. Congratulations. Naruto returned the smile. News really does travel fast in this village. Yes, well, shinobi go on missions and wives gossip. It's the way of things. There was some humor in her voice as she said it. He was glad for that at least. But no, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for Sasuke. Naruto grew a little confused at that. He really didn't think he'd done anything more than any sensei would for their student. But Mikoto quickly explained, we were both in a very dark place after the incident. I I tried my best to be there for him, but I was grieving myself for the longest time. When I finally felt ready to be a mother again, to be the support he needed, in a way, it was too late. He had already started walking a dark road. She ripped her gaze away from the picture, but her eyes were no less sad. I thought I might have lost both my sons that night, and no matter how hard I tried to be there for him, maybe I let him get away with too much. Maybe I wasn't strict enough with him. I don't know. He just kept pushing me further away. She managed a small smile as she looked up at the redhead. Until you. I don't. Mikoto held up a hand to cut him off. It must have been, a month or so after he joined your team, after that mission to Nami. He came back in, sat down at the table, and for the first time in so long he began to talk to me about his day. She smiled fondly. He couldn't stop talking about how excited the mission had been, at how surprised with his teammates he was, and how far he had to go to catch up with his sensei. Not because he wanted to kill his brother, but because he'd found someone genuinely strong to look up to. She looked around, and Naruto was surprised to find tears percolating at the edge of her eyes. In some ways, I got my son back that day, and I don't know if it was you or his teammates, or maybe he just needed time, but I wanted to thank you all the same. She continued to surprise him by moving forward and briefly wrapping her arms around the stunned teen, and just for a moment, Naruto nearly felt tears of his own gather as, despite how much time passed, despite the difference in heights between them, he couldn't help but be reminded of how his mother used to hold him. He was almost a little sorry when she finally stepped back, although he'd managed to get his expression back under control before she could see, wearing a wide but genuine smile. Always happy to help. Mikoto nodded, patting him gently on the cheek. You haven't changed at all, have you? I like to think I've gotten more handsome. He shot back cheekily, happy to elicit a small laugh from the older woman. Well, I can't deny you inherited your father's looks, Mikoto admitted with a roll of her eyes. The moment was interrupted, though, by a soft patting by a feet down the stairs. Sensei, what are you doing here? Sasuke asked, understandably confused considering Naruto hadn't so much as stepped foot within the Chiyo compound since their team had formed. I'll I'll just leave you to it then, Mikoto said. I'll make some tea if you're staying. She looked at Naruto only for the redhead to shake his head. Not for long, most likely. This was sort of spur of the moment, and I likely need to get back to Anko. Mikoto nodded understandingly and shut the door behind her, leaving Sasuke standing there uncertainly on the stairs. Sensei, if this is about Ami, Naruto quickly put a hand up, cutting him off. Actually, no. He closed his eyes for a moment. Understand you did everything you could. Those Kumonin were more experienced. You were outclassed and outnumbered, and but I shouldn't have been. Sasuke cut in heatedly, shaking his head a moment later. We shouldn't have been. I should never have let Hinata run off like that. I should have retreated the moment we knew something was off. I should never have let Ame. He shrugged off, fist clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He nearly jumped when Naruto put a hand on his shoulder. Sasuke, you can't beat yourself up over this. Be in a position of combat. Things can't always go the way you plan, and sometimes, no matter how much we might hate it or wish that it went different, things go wrong. Then they wouldn't have if it was you instead of me. Sasuke muttered darkly. Naruto had to bite back a wince. Sasuke didn't know quite how deeply that stung, even if it was supposed to be praise. I'm still not strong enough, not for Itachi, and not for Ami. Naruto just squeezed his shoulder. Like I said, you can't think like that. He smiled, although it was a little forced. Besides, it's not like we've given up on Ame. She's strong. You and I know that best. He was surprised to see Sasuke smile slightly. She really surprised me, you know. Although through the academy she was always dead last and everything, just another one of those useless fawning girls. I didn't thought she had a dead fawning all through the academy, she was always dead last in everything. Just another one of those useless, fawning girls. I didn't expect to make it past the first year, but she clung on, even making it to my team. I thought she'd be a dead weight there too, and it irritated me when you said you would treat us all equally. The idea that you could bring her up to my level, to any kind of level, but then she grew so quickly, catching up to me so fast that I actually felt threatened by the dead last. The dark-haired teen sighed, looking up at his older teacher with searching eyes. How did you do that? How did you see that potential? Naruto chuckled slightly, motioning for the Chiha to follow him as they made their way outside. You say that as if I have some special gift or something. There's potential in everyone, Sasuke. Things that some people are better at than others. Can you honestly say you could ever be as good a medic as Sakura? Sasuke shrugged. There was a lot of memorization involved with medical jutsu, but at the same time, the situational creativity that was so uniquely Sakura. So what? It's just about seeing the best in everyone. This time it was Naruto's turn to shrug. Sasuke's gaze quickly turned dark. What if it isn't there? His expression lost his intensity when Naruto tripped him slightly, sighing tiredly. I didn't come here to discuss your brother, Sasuke. You know that line of thought leads nowhere. That seemed to remind Sasuke of what he'd said before. What did you come here for? I thought this place had bad memories for you too. Naruto looked around, spotting a vacant shop that he remembered as one of Tsuchi's favorites because the owner would sometimes sell him fireworks on the sly. There's a lot of good memories here too, but I'm here to talk about the past. But I'm not here to talk about the past or even dwell on it. He chuckled, still uncertain of what he was about to ask. Quite the opposite, actually. They had reached the gates of the compound, so Naruto turned, biting his lips slightly. I don't have a lot of guy friends. I mean, Kakashi was my captain, and Tenso's my subordinate. I don't really know Asuma or Genma, and them. Kinda missed that chance in Ambu. Since you're rambling, Sasuke deadpanned. Right, he chuckled sheepishly. Well, I don't know if you heard, but I asked Uncle to marry me, and well, it's funny. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly as Sasuke nodded. I always kind of imagined Shisui and Itachi would be there for me when the day finally came, and well, obviously, he slumped over, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Coming, I'm bad at this. Are you asking me to be your best man? Sasuke asked, eyes wide in genuine astonishment. Well, yeah, I mean, not that you're some replacement for your brother or anything. I don't mean that at all, and I'll just shut up now, he finished as he saw Sasuke's eyes narrowing slightly. Why me? At that, Naruto found he could finally smile genuinely. Because you're my precious student, and I want you to be there for me. He could see Sasuke was confused by the offer and waved a hand absently. Just think on it, maybe. He was about to turn and leave when Anambu dropped into the compound, usually frowned upon by clans, unless the news was urgent. Taicho, news from the hospital. The redhead just glanced at the operative, finding him vaguely familiar. One of the newer recruits towards the end of his tenure. Go on. Hey, your student, sir. She's back. At that, all thoughts of weddings and questions fled from both Naruto and Sasuke's minds. As the redhead gave a quick glance at Uchiha, nodded, placed his hand on the younger teen's shoulder, and teleported them both in a flash. It was a few hours before Sakura cleared Ame as well enough to be debriefed in the presence of her team, her sister, and the Sandem. The girl had been confused when she came through the gates, sprinting back to Konoha from wherever she had been, like a woman on a mission. She couldn't even tell anyone why, just that she had an overwhelming urge to get back to Konoha as fast as possible. To Sakura's chagrin, the girl had managed to loosen her carefully wrapped bandages in her waist, and Sakura was keeping her in the hospital until she was sure she hadn't worsened any internal injuries. She was usually vague about just how she'd gotten away from the Kumo shinobi. She recounted everything right up to the point she jumped from the cliff, a moment that had everyone from her team wanting to simultaneously throttle and comfort her. But details from after that to the moment she stopped outside the massive reinforced gates of the village were vague and disjointed at best. Even when Sakura pointed out that the bandages she was wrapped in weren't the standard issue given to how to tune in teams, meaning somebody must have cared for her, she had no good answers. She looked visibly pained when she tried to think about what happened, nearly causing Sakura to ask everyone to leave. Naruto and Hiruzen were the most disturbed as the signs pointed to a powerful genjutsu and external influence. But if that was another village, Kumo being the most likely, why would they simply return Ame to Konoha? Was it a deal with the Rakage? But then why the Genjutsu? Hiruzen thanked the girl for the report and left with a troubled look, and after it became clear Ame wasn't in much condition to hold a conversation, Sasuke followed him. However, he surprised everyone when he paused in front of Ame's bed, reaching down awkwardly for a stiff, stilled hug before hurrying from the room. Sakura followed him out with a bemused expression. Have already made her feelings on Ame's return clear during the time as she was treating the girl. Naruto was about to leave too, to let Ame and Yuji talk when she croaked from the bed. I did as you trained me, Sensei, didn't I? He paused, coming back to side on the side of the bed, and rest his hand on her hair, ruffling it gently in the way she hated so much. Yeah, you did, and you did amazingly, more than I could ever have asked. The girl gave a tired smile, already feeling the effect of the anesthetic Sakura gave her. There was a commotion from the hallway before Uncle, with Haya peeking over her shoulder, came bursting into the room, clearly about to announce herself exuberantly. With both Naruto's and Yuji's hand over her mouth, it came out more as a muffled jumble. This spectacle still managed to draw a chuckle from the girl, though, especially when Haya jumped from Uncle's back to land on the side of her bed, looking down at her with the big watery eyes. It's Ami Nichan, okay? Ami was clearly struggling to stay awake at this point, but managed to smile brightly for the younger girl. Nothing some rest can't fix. She motioned with her arms, and Hayaki took the cue, crawling up next to the violet as Ami drifted off to sleep, huddled in tight. Strong kid, Uncle remarked, unable to do anything but smile at the adorable scene. That she is, Naruto agreed, hiding his concern for now. She'll be just fine, Yuji finished, as all three adults shared a look before settling down in a comfy spot to watch over the two young girls. It would be a long night. End of chapter 37.